Many years ago, I found myself in the car with my dad. He was taking me to the airport early in the morning, around 4 or 5. I was probably flying back home to New York. I remember sitting in the passenger seat, staring out at the purple Florida sky as the sun was getting ready to rise. The highway was empty and calm. We don't really talk, my dad and I. We only listen to the morning radio. This particular host was asking people to share stories of unexplained things that happened to them. I remember one woman called the station and recounted a time she was sleeping when she heard a noise in the other room. It was late at night, and since she lived alone, she was concerned. She went out to the living room and saw, through the dark, a large figure in the corner of the room, about 20 feet from where she stood. The figure was tall, over 8 feet, crouching slightly so as not to hit the ceiling. It was covered in shadows. The woman neither fled nor fought. She could only stand perfectly still and stare, unsure of what to do. The presence did not feel good or evil, but powerful. The woman was afraid, but she didn't fear for her life. She just knew it didn't belong there, and she wanted it gone. The figure said nothing and only looked in her direction. After a few long moments, the figure opened its monstrous wings, darkening the room even more than what seemed possible. She braced herself. Finally, the figure beat its colossal wings one time with a loud crack. The entire apartment filled with a rush of cold air, almost knocking her to the ground. When she looked back up, the room was empty and the air was still. The only sound she heard was the ceiling fan whirring in her bedroom. After some time, she was able to fall asleep again. The next morning, she awoke to a call from her mother. Her father had passed away in his sleep the night before. He had lung cancer. Back in the car, the radio host sent to commercials, and I was able to breathe again. I remember being particularly chilled by her story. To be visited by a creature like that in the dead of night must have been a horrific and incredible thing. My dad, next to me, noticed my discomfort. Without looking away from the road, he said, "You don't have to worry about him. I haven't seen him in a while." The job I have is an unconventional one. That's the best way to lead with it. A lot of people in New York have a dog that's old or sick or dying, and more often than you'd think, they don't know what to do with it. Some can't afford to put it down. Some think it's murder. Some have inherited the dog in already bad shape and don't really know how to cope with it. Some just get tired of them, and that's where I come in. These people are rich and spoiled and are moving on to the next thing. They leave the country for a break and I dog sit their house and watch the dog slowly die. They don't come back into the country until I text them, "Your dog died." I don't use the name and I don't explain how it happened. Then I bag up the dog. I try to make the dog's remaining days comfortable. I do the treats, I do the walks. I let them lay on the couch with me. But there's this unmistakable odor of death in the house. A malaise of impending eternity. The dogs know. They always know. I was staying in a brownstone in Park Slope. The place was a staircase on top of a staircase, and so the dogs stayed on the main floor. It was gray and large and lumbered around, blind in its age. It moved slowly and pained. Its ears didn't flick to sounds anymore. His mouth barely opened. I gave him a week. Its owners were at their summer house in Calabasas, and I remember wondering what they were doing. I imagined them drinking on a man-made lake. I imagined them doing cocaine. A father, his trophy wife, their 2 attractive kids. They'll never want for anything. They were probably already picking out some purebred or fancy mix. I went down to the cellar and got beers from the fridge. I imagined having a fridge just for beer. It was a nice thought. I came back upstairs and started settling in. I watched the dog move around like a Roomba. It'd lay down, it'd get up and shuffle somewhere else. It started to smell the air. It happened when I was watching TV. They had this giant couch and projector, one of those Fire Sticks. I was drunk on Coors Light, and then I heard the crash. Shit, I thought. I must have left the cellar open when I went to get the beer, and the dog went down the steps. What a way to go, I thought. Tangled and broken in a heap in the cellar, falling down in the darkness, cut up against rusty nails. The last breaths being dust and cobwebs. I almost didn't want to look. When I got to the top of the steps, I heard it. I was looking down and I could just make out the dark shadow of where the dog landed. I tried to see if it was breathing. There was a low, deep growl. But it wasn't the dog. It was something else in the cellar. I stayed put. I just listened. And then the deep growl spoke to me. Your dog died. The sun had just set, but Karen and I didn't go inside. We talked longer, opening up another bottle of wine to really push us into the danger zone. We were friends, have been for a long time. I don't remember how we landed on the subject of witches, but Karen was ready for the topic. She said she'd been thinking about them a lot lately. You don't really believe in them, I said. Her back was turned to me, lighting those tiki torches to keep the flies off and save us from the darkness. What do you mean? Hell yeah, I do, she said. It was matter of fact, no debating with her. I was the odd one. I drank some wine. I couldn't smell it that well. The smell of the tiki torch fuel was running the show. Not grabbing a broom and flying off into the sky type shit, though, Karen said. Ow! She sucked in her finger. Burned. Is there a different type? I asked. Well, let me put it this way. She stopped what she was doing. She left the torch she was working on and rejoined me. It stood alone in the darkness, unlit, like an outsider looking in. Think about it this way. People have a lot of energy, right? A lot of good energy and a lot of bad energy, right? Sure. I thought of my aunt. Bad energy. Really bad energy. I don't know why I thought of her. She had makeup tattooed on because she didn't ever want to fuss with it. Like that old story by Oates. The man with the painted mask, the colors running out at the neck. And so yeah, spells and shit and curses probably aren't real. Like taking a cauldron and putting things in them and chanting and shit. That's fake. Right, but she didn't let me finish. So, what I'm afraid of are the people that do it anyway. Imagine someone with so much ill will towards you, with so much evil and hate towards you that they go out of their way to do impractical things. Things like piss and bleed into a jar and bury it on your property. Things like steal your hair or prick dolls with pins. Okay, I thought of Aunt Selena again. Her gnarled knuckles. How she'd make my dad cry late at night. How he'd scream for her to leave. And what's the difference? I mean, really? Karen asked. She looked at her wine glass. Her face, through the warped glass, bent and morphed. Beyond her, past her shoulder, the unlit torch stood there in the darkness, a spectator watching from the black. When someone has that much hate towards you, Karen continued, it doesn't matter if the magic is real. I ended up staying the night at her place, sleeping on the couch, thinking about home. The home I grew up in, not the one I live in now. The home with my father and mother and my Aunt Selena living in our attic. I imagined her shuffling around, murmuring. Sometimes she'd come down, thrilled to see us. Sometimes we'd go weeks without a word. My mother hated having her in the house. My father, I think, deep down, did as well. But Latinos don't leave their family behind. It's tight-knit. But nobody tells you as a kid who in your family is what they do, what they like. Karen lives on a lake, and I can hear the swell and brush of the tide. The dock, not too far off, creaks. It's past midnight, and it takes me a second to notice that one of the torches in the backyard is turned on. The orange flame flickering alone, whipping back and forth in the breeze. When my mother left, my father turned away from the world. Aunt Selena kept telling us, that she wasn't right. My mother was the bad one. That my mother was keeping our family back. I remember my father, drunk, talking to me in the dead of night. His breath was thick with rum and mint. He had tears in his eyes. There's a door inside of me, he told me. He held my wrist tight, his hairy arms, his bald head. His voice quivered. There's a door inside of me, and I closed it tight a long time ago. I was 18 when this happened, about to go to college. My mother had been out of the picture for some years now. I can feel it trying to open. I can feel the doorknob rattling, shaking. Let your father alone, my Aunt Selena chimed in. She was standing at the glass door of the lanai, the light behind her obscuring her features, like a dark shadow in the window. Now I'm walking towards one of the flickering torches in the backyard. I didn't bother to wake up Karen. I'm drunk and the world is kind of spinning, and the closer I come to the circle of torches, the closer I can see faces, people that I know. My Uncle Javi, my Aunt Maria, my abuela, my grand uncle. Faces I only remember from old faded photo albums. photo albums covered in dust that my Aunt Selena would plop down on our kitchen table and talk to me about. My mother would always leave the room. My dad would sit quietly, subdued, eyes glued to the floor. And I can feel it. What my dad was talking about all those years ago. The door in my chest, the rattle of the wood, the knob trying to turn. Something inside of me trying to be realized, trying to come forth and spill out of my pores like bile. But it scares me, and tears start to sting my eyes. And when I look backwards, I can see Karen staring from the window. And the torches surround me, and there's a blaze of fire. And then I'm 10 years old again. I'm in my attic, and I'm watching my aunt take long folds of cloth and cut them into shapes. And I watch her take pins out of a cushion. And I watch her hands, scars like pinstripes along her palms. I look at jars. I look at filth trapped in glass. And downstairs I can hear my dad sobbing. And the door slams, and my mother has just left, and I will never see her again. And when my dad's crying peaks, I turn to run down the wooden steps to him, but my aunt says, "Let your father alone." And so I do. And I watch my aunt work on her crafts. Almost overnight, my apartment was emptied. She came home one day from work and very calmly sat me down and told me that she was sorry, but she no longer wanted to be in a relationship and needed to move out immediately. I asked for an explanation, but she didn't have one. She was unhappy and just needed to do this. That night, she slept on her friend's couch, and the following afternoon, she had a moving company take her stuff. It took them 4 hours. I had never lived alone before. If I had chosen it, I probably would have enjoyed it, but because it happened so abruptly, I was miserable. Every day I'd wake up to a barren apartment with empty frames on the walls, gaping holes in the decor, things missing that you wouldn't think about until you suddenly needed it, like a pencil. There was not one pencil or pen in the entire apartment. I desperately needed more income. My rent had doubled, but my salary did not. I took on freelance clients on the side, working late on most nights and weekends just to pay the bills. And then I remembered her closet. I avoided it for a while, as a defense mechanism, but finally opened it and peered inside. It was empty save for a few things she deemed unworthy to take with her and thus could remain with me, like an ill-fitting blazer and an old Buddha statue. I read somewhere that some guy made an app that was being called like the Airbnb of storage. People who have extra space can rent it out to people who need to store stuff. I quickly drafted a profile, uploaded some poorly lit photos of the space, and suddenly had a ping. Joe S. Some Long Island guy who needed a place in Brooklyn to store some stuff while he moved. Seemed easy enough. Days later, he was at my front door. Joe was a short, skinny, pasty man with glasses, but he was fine. He rolled one large cardboard box in on a red dolly and set it dead center in the closet. I expected more boxes, but that was all he had. The box was taped shut many times over. "I'm not good at throwing things away," he said before he left. He told me it was just some old clothes and books he wanted to sell. I received the first month's payment an hour later. I went and bought some much-needed stuff for my apartment, including some pencils. A week went by and I'd forgotten the box was there, until one night I heard a rustling from the closet. I sat up in bed and listened. My apartment made a lot of strange noises, and so did my neighbors, but this sound felt closer. It was the kind of sound that feels inside. I watched the closet door for a few moments. It was 5 feet from where I slept, directly in front of my bed. The noise stopped. I went back to sleep. The next morning, just to be safe, I looked in the closet before I left for work. There was the box, exactly where Joe had left it, untouched, already accumulating dust. The sound must have come from the vents, where I could occasionally hear my neighbors fighting in the apartment above mine. A few more days went by, or at least I think it was a few days. This was when the real depression started, setting up camp in my gut, clouding my timeline. I went to bed too early, I got up too late. My tardiness was noticed at work and I was reprimanded. I took randomly scattered sick days and sat in bed for hours on end, feet away from the closet door. One day during this time, I came home and I was making myself dinner. I noticed things were missing from my fridge that I could have sworn were there last time I looked. I took a survey of my apartment. Cups were not where I left them, and a few things looked moved. I texted my ex and I asked her if she'd been coming to the apartment while I was at work. She was the only one who had the key besides me. She said of course not, and then berated me for accusing her of such a thing. We started fighting. I took the next day off. When I woke up late the following morning, I checked the app. I didn't get this month's payment. It seems Joe's account had been deleted. Support said they were working on collecting from him and would let me know when they figure it out. I looked at the closet door. It was ajar by 2 inches. When I opened it, the box was sitting there as it always was, but I could see that the tape had been severed. I closed the closet door and I went back to sleep. I eventually got fired and didn't leave my bed for days on end. Dirty plates and dishes piled up all over my apartment, and not all of them were mine. By this point, I had heard the movement of a person in my closet. Very clear, very distinct. Whoever was in there was waiting for me to go to sleep or leave. One night at around 4 a.m., I was wide awake, scrolling through my phone. My sleep cycle had been completely fucked, and now I was restless all night and sleeping most of the day. I heard the knob of the closet door turn slightly. I didn't react. I was waiting for this night to come. The door opened and there was a man in my closet, completely wrapped from head to toe in gauze, like hospital bandages. There was no blood, just gauze, with only an opening for his mouth and 2 tiny holes for his nostrils. Neither of us did anything. I sat in bed, looking at him through the darkness. The blue light through the window showed me only the outline of his body, standing in my ex's closet, just listening. He was crouched slightly because of the closet shelf. I think he was listening for my reaction, and when I did nothing, so did he. The box next to him was open, ripped tape dangling from the cardboard flaps. After a few minutes of standing silently in the dark, he slowly grabbed the door handle, softly closed the closet, concealing him once again. I heard some rustling as he folded himself back into his home. I laid back in my bed and kept scrolling for a few more hours until I finally fell asleep. Now I have a new roommate. Things are starting to look up. She turns the corner towards her apartment door, faltering. She had a few tonight and she feels a bit blurry. It was fun though, the most fun she's had since the break. She feels very lucky to have such a strong support system during these times. Tonight was a good night. The hallway leading up to her apartment looked just as it always has, well lit, carpeted, like a low-budget hotel, which is more than most people could say for their New York City apartments. But something was off. She heard music coming from inside her apartment, where she lived alone. She stopped and listened, her skin tightening on her arms. She recognizes it instantly. It's that old Flamingo song, I Only Have Eyes for You. Everyone knows that song. But she knows it for a different reason. It's their song. It was the first song they danced together to. It's the song they would play every anniversary, all four of them. She even has the 1959 Flamingo Serenade record, obviously, because it's playing right now. She leans on the wall of the corridor and sighs, feeling that anxiety creeping up her gut, you know? He's here and he wants to get back together. He still has a key. She never actively told him not to come over. They did live in this apartment for 2 years after all. She shakes her head, trying to sober up. He's playing their song, clearly trying to do some grand gesture, and she needs to not buy in. She needs to be strong. Her friends told her that all night. She can't take him back after all the shit he's done, no matter how much he's been begging over the past month. She just can't. She finally turns the doorknob. It opens. She takes a deep breath, preparing for a long night of fighting and crying. All the lights in her apartment are off, but a record player is on in the living room. Paul? No answer, just music. Her eyes have trouble adjusting to the light change. She turns the hall light on and sees drops of blood on the floor, feet in front of her. Something's very wrong. Paul? She takes out the mace from her purse and peers her head around the corner, wide-eyed and unbreathing. She sees a figure sitting on her couch in the dark, the record spinning calmly on the side table. It looks vaguely Paul-shaped. Paul? Is that you? Her shaking hand finally reaches the main light switch. Her apartment fills with light. When she sees him, her blood turns to ice and she falls backwards against the bathroom door, screaming. Paul is sitting calmly on her couch waiting for her, blood streaming down his cheeks and staining his button-up shirt and khaki pants. One of her kitchen knives lies useless on the coffee table, also bloodied. On Paul's face are 2 bloody holes where his eyes used to be, staring in her direction but not directly at her. He smiles, tired, happy she's home. She doesn't know what to do but crouch and scream as loud as she can for help. She can't move. She can't do a thing. Finally, he stands up, arms open, as if asking for one last dance. And I only have eyes for you. July 3rd. I've tried everything. Drano, snaking it, bleach, I routinely get down on my hands and knees and just yank at the hair and mess that seemingly forms overnight. It's not an impossible fix. It just seems like I'm doing it far more often than I should be. I'm talking about my bathtub, of course. The water slowly fills up past my ankles and then slowly goes back down. Leaving that brown ring of filth and grime. How the hell am I supposed to bring a girl over with this? July 13. I was told to not pour Drano into it. Apparently it's bad for the pipes. Newer buildings with newer pipes can handle it, but old lead pipes corrode faster than you think. This is what Timmy tells me. I don't know why I should believe him. He's not a plumber or anything. He's just old. Some people just command that type of authority, I suppose. No Drano it is. But then what? July 15. Super doesn't care. Landlord doesn't either. Maybe I should just withhold rent. But how's that gonna look? I'm not paying because of the hair in my drain? How do I prove that it's not mine? July 16. It's not just hair in my drain. I can hear the skittering in the pipes. Del Monte tells me this is normal. Just roaches and bugs and shit, maneuvering around. Why did I move here? Hell, why does anyone move here? I should have gotten that apartment in Kensington. The rent was affordable. The buildings were nice. It was just far as fuck. Not that I'm going anywhere. July 20. I think someone else is showering in my shower. Timmy showed me this article about a guy who found a squatter living in his attic. I think that's what's happening. I could just feel the presence of someone around each corner. In the dark, when the lights are off, sometimes I could feel them there. And if I just quickly grabbed the darkness, I'd get their elbow or their hair. They're that close. July 25. When I got home, my apartment door was open. July 26. A strange night. Went with Del Monte to get my cards read. The woman couldn't do them. She said there was a lock on me. She looked scared. Her and some others whispered in a hushed tone. Del Monte took me outside and said I should probably head home. July 28. Del Monte isn't returning my calls. July 30. There's something in my apartment. I can hear it. I can feel it. When I was showering, the water, per usual, started to flood past my ankles. I turned off the water and stood there, listening. And then I heard it. Clear as day, I saw it too. 2 distinct splashes, like 2 feet were stepping into the bathtub with me. I watched the water break and splash and even ripple. The steam in the room took on a different density. It was a wave of cold. August 1. Timmy ran into Del Monte outside of Baby's All Right. Said he seemed shook. Apparently asked about me a lot. How do you refuse to talk to someone but then ask a million questions about them? We were close. I miss him. August 2. The nice old black ladies don't come to my door anymore. They used to slide Jesus and God flyers under my door every week. I was leaving for work and I caught them. They looked scared, like I caught them in some act. Tried to be charming. Asked if I could have one. The woman was shaking. August 3. Bought Drano. Don't know why. I might drink it. I'm just kidding. August 3 again. I had a dream about drinking Drano and swallowing a Zippo. Didn't love it. August 4. Woke up to the shower running. Water nearly flooded out of the tub. It's gonna take fucking forever for it to go down. August 5. Now the sink won't drain. Toilet either. This building is fucked. August 6. Knocked on my neighbor's door to see if they were having problems. No answer. Looking back, they've been quiet for a while. No TV, no music. I wonder if they're traveling. August 7. Another nightmare. Still no word from Del Monte. Think he also told Timmy something too. What the fuck is going on? August 8. Got home and saw caution tape all over my neighbor's door. Cops were pulling out a body on the stretcher. Trouble in paradise. August 9. Got the idea of pouring Drano down the drain and throwing a lit match down there. Who knows? August 10. Fuck it. August 11. Fuck it. August 12. Tub never drained. August 15. Bad dreams. A woman came and asked about my neighbors. Asked if I saw them digging around in front of the building or maybe like fucking around in the cellar. Asked if they've ever been violent to animals or if they've overheard them in the middle of the night. I told her I had my own problems. August 16. Gonna drink the Drano. Seems funny. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, please do not throw this letter away. I'm writing this to you in the hopes that what you're about to read may provide some sort of comfort for you. I can only imagine the pain you've been feeling over the last few months. I've been in pain too, but a different pain. I was planning on leaving you alone so that you could grieve for Emily in your own way. It was the least I could do. But in the light of some new developments, I've decided that I have a new plan. At this point, if you prefer to rip up this letter and throw it in the fire, I'd completely understand. I will not take offense. Either way, you will never hear from me again. Part 1. What you know. I'll start where you and I last spoke 3 months ago, the police report. I want to make it clear that I told the truth in my original report to the police and during my subsequent visits to those station interrogation rooms. Under those fluorescent lights and buzzing air conditioning, drinking stale Keurig coffee, I knew that I was their number one suspect and I knew that I was yours too, but it didn't matter. I was then and I continued to be innocent. Most of the report is still accurate as I write this letter. The night before I first noticed the bruising, Emily and I were walking to my apartment across Prospect Park from the movie theater. About halfway through on Center Drive, a main artery across the park, we started to argue about how much time we spend at my house and how little we spend at hers. A stupid thing to bicker about in retrospect, but at the time it was the hot button topic in our relationship. We reached the point of the argument in which we were both angry, voices raised, saying hurtful things we'd regret in an hour. I walked away and I told her that she should go home, back in the opposite direction. As I walked away, fuming, I heard her scold me from where she stood. Yeah, walk away. Leave me in the fucking park alone at night. Great idea. Fuck you. We didn't text until the next morning. As you know, I felt bad about our fight and I texted her. We went to brunch and everything seemed fine, except she was acting a little different. She looked at me as if she wasn't listening to what I was saying. She nodded, but she didn't seem engaged. At the time, I thought it was because she was angry at me and had maybe hit her breaking point in our relationship, but I pushed those thoughts away in an attempt to move forward and rebuild. The rest of the day was pretty ordinary for us until I saw the bruise. She was at my apartment, undressing for a shower. When she removed her yoga pants, I noticed a large blue and purple half circle blotched on the right side of her abdomen, just above her hip. I asked her what it was, concerned by the size. Oh. She looked at the bruise as if it was the first time seeing it. It's nothing. I ran into a doorknob last night. I guess I was still a little drunk. The bruise did not look doorknob-shaped, and as she turned to my bathroom, I saw the bruise wrapped around her ribs to the right side of her lower back. Still, I believed her. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, you have to understand that at this point, every strange thing she did was, to me, evidence of her distancing herself and gradually ending our relationship. We texted much less than we normally did. I chalked it up to work. We spent more time alone in our separate apartments. It felt like the end. At any moment, I expected a "we need to talk" text. Still, I tried every day to remain calm and think positively. I planned a nice date for us that I hoped would bring us back. By the time of our date, almost a week had passed without seeing each other, which was unusual for us. We went to a restaurant. She looked exceptionally tired. Her hair was a bit unruly, not very like her. She wasn't wearing makeup, also not like her. She had large, dark bags under her eyes, and her skin was breaking out on her cheeks and chin. I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, just tired because she'd been working late nights. Her boss needed some urgent thing for next week. It seemed reasonable. Most of the dinner was quiet. She nodded at my attempts to start conversation and offered quick, shallow chuckles to my jokes. She seemed preoccupied, like she was running hundreds of simulations in her eyes that I couldn't see. I noticed fresh pink scratches on the skin of her hands and wrists, the kind that doesn't fully break the skin but leaves white streaks in their wake. She spent the night after our uncomfortable dinner. I tried to be physical and playful, but she was uninterested, tired. She changed her clothes for bed. I saw the bruise on her ribs, now dark purple and green, the shape of a coffee stain. I noticed it was bigger than last time, now reaching to her breast and lower hip. I didn't realize yet that it looked remarkably like a bite mark. But now there was a second bruise, a fresh blue one with dots of purple. Just like the first, it was ring-shaped, but this ring circled her entire thigh like a sickening garter belt. "What is that on your leg? Are you okay?" I accidentally banged it on the kitchen cabinet. "That doesn't look like a kitchen cabinet. Did something bite you?" The question slipped out from underneath my brain. Of course she was not bitten. What would bite her? It was nonsense. Still, the question felt necessary and silenced the room. She looked at it, contemplating her answer. "Are you hearing yourself? Of course not. Can we please just go to sleep?" We didn't speak after that. We got into bed and I laid there looking at the ceiling, watching the moonlight on my wall wane as clouds passed. Normally she'd fall asleep quickly and I'd hear her soft, slow breathing next to me. That night, she was awake and unmoving. I fell asleep first. A few hours later, I awoke and felt the bed empty. She was standing directly next to me, staring intently out of my bedroom window, which offers a modest view of the tall oaks outlining the perimeter of Prospect Park. Both of her hands were on the glass and she leaned in, widening her eyes and concentrating her stare. It looked like she was trying to force her pupils to adjust to something in the darkness, something through the trees. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Confused, I went back to sleep. The next morning, she was gone. That marked the end of our relationship, I thought. We didn't speak for an entire week. My anxiety quickly turned into anger. I texted her, calling her a piece of shit for ghosting me after we were together for over a year. I explained in detail how she was not a good person for how she handled this, how if she wanted to end this, she should have done it in person like an adult. No response. By the following weekend, the anger subsided and I was desperate for closure. Against my better judgment, I showed up at her place unannounced and saw that the door to her apartment was ajar. I opened it and peeked in, calling her name. She wasn't home, but I went in anyway. Her studio looked about the same as I remembered it, except that her bed was completely stripped, leaving just the mattress on a box spring and pillows scattered on the floor. The sheets and duvet were gone. She must have taken them with her. Either way, something felt wrong. That's when, if you remember, I called the cops. Everything up until this point you already know from the police report, aside from some of my personal editorializing. I met you later that day for the first time, like some sort of dark timeline where I meet the parents in the presence of law enforcement with the girlfriend nowhere to be found. As you know, I talked to the detectives for days. They searched my apartment and cross-examined my parents and everyone else I fucking know. Finally, they told us their only credible theory was that she left town on her own accord. and that was that. Part 2. What you don't know. There was one other thing in her apartment. The brick wall next to her bed, where she had like this gallery wall of her favorite art and photography, was completely bare except for a single piece of paper taped to the brick. It was covered in markings. Her desk chair was placed 2 feet away from the wall, facing the paper. The piece of paper was some sort of low-quality printout of a map of Prospect Park. I recognized the diamond shape. On the paths of the park, she drew a series of long, curving arrows, all coming from her street. In the areas between the paths, like the lawns, the woods, and the lakes, there were about 20 scratchy X's and 3 large O's. While the X's were drawn hastily, almost not fully, the O's were circled frantically, multiple times until they were thick and wiry, like a bird's nest. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, but I did feel that unmistakable coldness fill my stomach. Emily, or even I, was in serious danger. Before I called the cops, I pocketed the piece of paper. In the weeks after they declared me no longer a suspect, I did what you might expect me to do. I quit my job and hid in my apartment, avoiding everyone. Her disappearance felt like my fault, even though I knew that it wasn't. I looked at her map constantly. I thought about it all day and night. I desperately tried to decipher it like some sort of wartime code. One night, I noticed that one of the circles she drew was very close to where she and I were the night of our fight. I dressed and walked straight into the park. When I got to the spot, it was almost 4 a.m. I've been to this exact spot many times, Center Drive. To the west is an intersection that connects with one of the main veins of the park. To the east, past a particularly poorly lit area with some dumpsters, there's another intersection. To the south is a massive lawn, dotted with the occasional tree and trash can, where hundreds of people lounge about on nice days, throwing discs, walking dogs, picnicking with lazily hidden alcoholic beverages. I've picnicked on this lawn hundreds of times. That night, however, the lawn was a dark, black expanse of nothing. Shadowy shapes in the distance played tricks on my eyes. The air was misty from rain, and the only light was a trail of yellow cones emanating from the street lamps. Typically, you might see a night runner or a longboarder, or maybe even an adventurous couple after a date, but when I arrived, there was no one. I looked at the map. I turned to face the north, which was nothing but some trees at the street's edge, a short fence, and then more trees and brush going up a hill. The circle was right where I was looking, the top of the hill. I looked around. With nobody in sight, I hopped the fence and quickly found myself in a thicket of trees that, if I didn't know any better, could have stretched for miles. Behind my phone's flashlight, I pushed deeper and deeper, tripping on knotted roots, wetting my clothes with dew, and cracking twigs under my feet. I looked back. I could just barely make out the street lamps. As I neared the top of the hill, the light of my phone passed over and then stopped upon something sleek in the distance about 20 feet in front of me. My short, exasperated breaths stopped, and I saw what looked like a large, glistening piece of roughly carved onyx placed precariously next to a tree. It seemed to be moving, slightly growing, and then slightly shrinking. It was breathing. It wasn't until it turned to look at me that I could see that it was a bony figure with onyx skin crouched in the brush. All I could make of the face were the pupils reflecting the light from my phone, the way you can see a cat watching you in the dead of night because of the reflection in its eyes. I quickly stepped back. Unable to scream, I tripped over a root and fell. That's all I remember of that night. I woke up in my bed, still in my damp clothes and muddy shoes. The clock said 4 p.m. I had been asleep for 12 hours. I surveyed myself. Everything was normal except for a tear on the left shoulder of my hoodie. I went to the bathroom, removed my clothes, and stared at my naked body in the mirror. On my left shoulder was a deep purple bruise. extending down to my pectoral, around my bicep, collarbone, and back. Just like Emily's, it was in the shape of a ring circling the corner of my torso, with the most intense clotting towards the outside. My shoulder was in something's mouth. I touched it softly with my finger. The pain seared down my spine like a sudden fire. The searing faded and was replaced by a wave of nausea. I vomited into the toilet. There wasn't much, but there was blood. Over the next 2 days, I debated whether I should report this to someone, anyone. But as the incident faded more and more into the past, my confidence in my memory faltered. I questioned what I saw. Was I sure that it was real? At the same time, my bruise was changing colors and spreading down my torso and up my neck. Less like poison coursing out from a bite, and more like licks of blood pooling around the injury. The pain faded to a dull but prominent pulsing. I couldn't sleep. Painkillers did nothing. And worst of all, I felt incomplete. I didn't want to go to the doctor. I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't even want to forget. I wanted more. I kept looking at the map on my phone. There were 2 more circles that Emily had drawn. I suspected that the X's were places she had tried and failed, though I'm not sure what trying or failing meant. I was back in the park 2 nights later. I didn't know why I was there, except that my pulsating bruise was generating some deep urge that needed to be satiated. The only way to do that in my mind was to find the thing that did it. I needed to feel more. I needed more. I still can't understand this urge even as I write this letter, but I can tell you it's only intensified. I went to the second circle on the map, poked around in the trees off the beaten path for hours like a madman. I limped because I couldn't walk without aggravating my injury. After a few hours, I ran into an older man searching the forest just like I was. We locked eyes in the reciprocal light from our phones and knew that we were on the same mission. Without saying a word, we went our separate ways. I felt embarrassed. I imagine he did too. I returned home empty-handed and felt true disappointment. The following night I went back, and then I went back every night after for at least 2 weeks, I think. I don't know, it's hard to tell as the nights began to blend into a mass of time spent searching. I don't remember doing anything during the day except pacing around my house for hours on end and staring out my window into the park, waiting for the sun to go down. This brings us to the night that I want to tell you about. I'm not sure if it was last night or 3 nights ago. All I know is that it was humid and moonless when I set out into the trees again. My bruise had spread down my torso and up my neck like I was dipped in purple tie-dye, rubber banded, and let out to dry. At this point, I had hit every spot on your daughter's map. I even began adding my own annotations to the map for whoever finds it next. Anyway, the trees looked about as they always do, crooked and crowded. I walked around for 2 hours in the dark and just listened. Finally, I heard a human noise in the distance. It was some sort of agonized moan, soft and desperate. I took out my new heavy-duty flashlight, hoping to find my prize and not just another searcher like me, and there she was. Your daughter. Emily was on her bed sheets, which were spread out like a picnic blanket in the small clearing. She was completely naked, lying supine on the sheets with her arms and legs spread as wide as she could get them. Every inch of her skin was covered in dirt and bruises, in deep blacks, blues, and purples. She had massive bite marks from head to toe, some wounds still open and oozing. Her hair was matted with mud and leaves, and her eyes were wide open, staring at the tips of the trees. She mumbled softly to herself, jerking her head in every direction. She didn't notice my flashlight or didn't care. I was unable to breathe, only step forward. When my foot cracked a stick beneath it, her head jerked painfully towards me, and she looked directly at me, catching the shine of my flashlight in her dilated pupils. When she saw I was not who she wanted, She turned back to the sky. Part 3. What you should know. I'm sorry to report that I did not tell the authorities that I found your daughter alive in the forest. That's for you to do if you decide it's worth it. If you ask me, Emily is right where she wants to be, or she's already gone for good. As for me, I'm currently sitting cross-legged in the dark on the lawn near where Emily and I first fought, scribbling this letter to you on a legal pad as fast as I can. Please excuse any typos or poor handwriting you may have encountered while reading this. I'm in a bit of a rush and the light is scarce. The night will not last forever. When I'm done writing this letter, I will fold it up and place it in a stamped envelope addressed to you. I have it already prepared. As there is no mailbox near me, I will leave it on a bench and hope that someone finds it and mails it. If not, then this was all for nothing. Then I will walk into the woods, back to where I found your daughter. If by some miracle she is still there, I will join her. If she is not, then I will take her place on those sheets and patiently await my turn.